Thank you for listening to BizPod with me, Paul.
And me, Rachel.
Our weekly business English podcast where we talk about the news, social media, and hot topics from a business point of view. You'll get a podcast and links to the articles we discuss. This way you can share your thoughts too. Join us as we discuss what's on our minds this week.
Hi, Paul. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. 2024.
I know, another year. It flies by, doesn't it?
That's true. But it is the start of our new season of BizPod.
It is. I'm excited. New format, new frequency. Should be fun.
It should be. And you've chosen a very interesting, well, I say interesting, but also sad because it's an obituary, but an interesting article for us to talk about in our first episode.
Jacques Delores. I'll be honest, I didn't know who was the champion of the European Union's single market and currency. I never knew until he died, and then I found out who he was, which I think is a shame because I should have known that, really.
Yeah, I think we both should have known that, but I was reading his obituary and he was the European president from 1985 to about 1995. And I don't know, I mean, I was very young and I had no interest in politics in those teenage years of my life. So I think that's why I don't know who he is, really.
Yeah, it's politics and it's economics, isn't it, combined together? But I think you're right. I think those two topics are things you become more interested in the older you get, which is a shame. Because, if I could live another life, I would love to have got into politics. Behind the scenes, of course, but never mind. Okay, so what would you sum up as the life of Jacques Delors?
Ooh, well, I mean, he's obviously had a very interesting life. If you read his obituary, I mean, the obituary you sent was to me, that was in The Guardian, the British newspaper, The Guardian. He didn't come from a typical background of politics, which is quite interesting. Because I think sort of, particularly in Britain, in the UK, politics is seen as a career now. You go to university, you study political science, you get a job with one of the political parties, and you work your way up in politics. But I'm not sure that Jacques Delors did that. He came from a background, a working class background.
It says lower middle class background, but with a ferocious work ethic. And strong religious faith. So he was quite an intense character, but I think, not from your typical, what we would call today, the typical political background, which is rich, going to very elite universities, studying political science, becoming a special advisor. Yeah. So maybe he should have had a better understanding of how hard it can be for some people in life. I mean, there is a little quote where he says, because I have had little education, as I'm not clever, before understanding something, I have to make a huge effort. And that's a little sad, really, isn't it? It's, commendable, but also, he recognizes that he was different to the others who he was having to interact with.
You said it's sad. I don't think it's sad. I think it's good that someone can recognize that they're perhaps not as clever or as knowledgeable in a certain subject as other people are, and then learn about that subject, study, learn something so that you can make better decisions. Whereas I think a modern day politician doesn't want to learn about a new subject. I think particularly in the UK, maybe in European politics, it's about getting the right headline in the right newspapers and becoming popular. Yeah, it's
Yes.
about the populism nowadays.
Mm,
I honestly don't think that politicians really think through their decisions and their choices as clearly as they could or they should.
mm. Well, you know, I'm a big fan of politics, and I'm in the middle of reading or listening to actually an audio book of Rory Stewart, who is a former minister, Politics on the Edge. And he himself, I didn't particularly used to like him. I thought he was a little bit of a weasel, but I have totally, changed my point of view of him now because understanding his life story and how much he had to learn and how much he was thrown into positions in parliament where he didn't know anything and he was exasperated trying to say, look, I'm not the best man for the job. um so, he had to learn a lot, but it's also that they don't put the right person in the right job. He was prisons minister. He was minister for Africa. And he said he knew nothing about Africa. He was an expert on Afghanistan. But what do? They throw him into Africa, and they also made him head of prisons where he said he had no idea. And it was a huge learning curve. But, that if anything, this time of year, January change, it's probably a moral for us all that if you don't know something, you can go out there and learn. Anybody can learn about
Hmm.
anything.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think from that book that you mentioned, Politics on the Edge, he's also spoken about. I mean, I won't name the people that he's spoken about particularly, but he's spoken about other politicians who didn't seem to really know the subject that they were supposedly in
Mm,
charge of, didn't seem to
mm,
really care about the subject.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I don't know. I just can't believe that somebody wants to be in politics, but they don't really care about the politics. What they really care about is themselves and their
Yeah.
own progression through the hierarchy of politics to one of the top jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. They should want to make lives for people that they represent better,
Yeah.
and they're
Well,
not.
let's talk about Jacques Delors then, because he was the person who really pushed for political monetary integration and the union, what is the modern European Union. He's the guy who really created it and pushed it through.
Yeah.
Do you think he did that because he believed that would be better for the people?
Well, that's difficult to say because obviously I didn't know about him before reading the obituary. And obviously, with an obituary, even though it's meant to just state the facts, you always get a flavour of the person who wrote it. They're going to have some kind of opinion. Um, and I would like to think that the way he pushed things forwards, he really, really did believe it was the right thing. I mean, there's another quote here. It says he told the European Parliament that the member states would have to learn to speak with a single voice and act together. He wanted it to be like a team effort.
Yeah,
But it also reads that towards the end, everybody seemed to hate him and hate his idea, and things had to be pushed through and with lots of objections. And and I would have I would have liked to have seen that there was some consideration of those who objected because it reads to me like he got to the point where he was pushing things through because he wanted to get it done regardless of what everybody else thought, which then goes against everybody working together for the greater good. So
yeah,
I'm a little bit worried about that, but well, it's all in the past now, isn't it? So um
yeah.
what do you think?
But well, I was going to say you do have to consider that project that he was pushing through, the creation of the European Union, single monetary policy, and all that, the euro. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen quickly. It happens over many years, and governments in the countries changed. So
Mm-hmm.
the government in one country at the beginning of the project may have been very, very positive and all for it, but then governments change and perhaps they change their attitudes. No,
Yep.
like in particular, if we think about in the UK at the time, Margaret Thatcher was prime minister, but after her came John Major. And I think, although they were from the same party, the Conservatives, they probably had different ideas about what was the best thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Margaret Thatcher, her famous speech where she said, no, no, no to Europe.
Yeah.
But John Major, he was the British Prime Minister who eventually signed the UK up to the European Union, to
Mm-hmm.
the new European Union model.
Mm-hmm. But they didn't go as far as taking the euro. I always, when people talk about Brexit, I always think, well, you know my thoughts about this. You can tell when people are totally committed or not because they either put both feet in or they don't. They have one foot in and one foot out. And I always think if somebody's one foot in, one foot out, they're eventually going to leave. And that was it with Britain. They never went fully in with the currency. They always had one foot out. So you knew full well that one day Brexit was going to happen sooner or later. It was later than I thought. But you could see it coming on the horizon. Um,
Yeah.
so even with
Well,
John Major, it wasn't a full commitment, was it?
no, it wasn't a full commitment, no, because even though John Major sort of signed up to the Maastricht Treaty, which was the treaty that created the euro, um, he never intended to to take the euro in the UK.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's like one foot in, one foot out. But I think from the UK's point of view, and from a lot of countries' point of view, they want all of the benefits of membership, but they don't want the bits that they don't want. You
Of
know,
course.
like like the European Union idea, I think as a trading bloc, it's a great idea. So why can't it just be a trading bloc? Why does it have to be political union? Why does it have to be monetary union?
I think the thing for me is each country has its own culture and you cannot homogenize cultures. I mean, that's what makes each of us, the richness of Italians versus French versus Germans. You know what I mean? It's about identity and you can't merge everybody's identity into one. There's
Yeah.
things you can merge and there's things you can't. And I think this whole idea of Europe was just going a leap too far. I mean, it said in the article as well, it said the fact that his strong French accent when speaking English and his austere and unsmiling appearance seemed to typify the arrogant European bureaucrat to the British tabloids. And that is just making a sweeping statement, arrogant European bureaucrat. But from which country? Are we just talking about French people here, which is going to be very, very, dangerous. You shouldn't be doing that. You know, is there a typical arrogant European bureaucrat? Or is it just typical French ones? or you know, it's just
I
it's
don't know.
just
I
really really dangerous to say things like that.
It is, yeah. But if you remember during the Brexit negotiations, the British press, the British media were depicting the Europeans. I can't remember. It wasn't. I can't remember who was in charge of the Brexit negotiations from the Europeans' point of view. But all the press was talking about how arrogant he was.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about
Yeah,
Michel Barnier?
that's the one. Barnier,
And
Michel
I,
Barnier.
I,
Yeah,
yeah, and I've got his book as well, The Secret Brexit
yeah.
Diaries.
Yeah. And he did appear to make some very arrogant statements in the press. But the problem with the press is they don't ever give you the full picture. They will
No,
take
just
one small part of what has been said,
a sound
and that's what
bite.
they were. Yeah, that's what they'll tell you.
Ah, they were just
Yeah,
taking bits that they knew would get British people very irate and hot under the collar and angry. And
possibly.
really, Yeah, Michel Barnier was trying to be, the person who is balancing the interests and opinions of both sides. Um, but yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? But do
Yeah.
you think, I mean, coming back to Jacques Delors, do you think he led a good life? I mean, thinking about legacy, what he's left behind, will he be remembered in a positive way or a negative way?
Um, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know enough about him and his history and his achievements. Um, I think the dream that from that era of
Mhm.
a federal Europe, I think that is still the dream for the Europeans, for those people, bureaucrats working in the European Parliament. But I'm not sure that all the governments involved are still committed to a federalized Europe. Um, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I can't imagine France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Austria becoming one single country.
And it's not just
Can
them.
you?
I mean, you think, was it 27 member states and they're thinking of accepting more? I mean, the more
Mm,
the bigger it gets, it's the more opinions you've got to bring together, different points of view, different perspectives, and it gets as the group gets bigger, it's going to get harder to agree.
mm, yeah. So perhaps the future of the European Union, if there are some, let's call them hardcore sort of member states who want to go for this federalized European system, they're going to have to break away from those who don't want to do it.
Well, they're talking about that. They're talking about two-tier Europe, aren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be interesting to see if that gets taken forward.
yeah. But then if you have a two-tier Europe, and I'm just thinking, if you imagine you had a two-tier Europe where you have, let's say, France and Germany, who have a border, they are literally connected to each other. But then what if some other country, say from I don't know, further east in Europe, wants to become a member of the top tier, but they're not physically connected to other members of the top tier. What would be the implications of that, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, will the top tier be something that is, location based? Will there be a physical element or not? I mean, the whole
Yeah,
idea of Schengen is that there are no borders. So if you base it on Schengen, it can only be countries that are connected together. Surely.
yeah. Well, the idea of Schengen was there are no borders until not so long ago. Borders were
Well,
re-established in quite a lot of places.
it's getting a bit crazy, isn't it? Maybe
Yeah,
they need to take a blank sheet of paper and just take a fresh look, because there must be things that are in place now which aren't working. There's no shame in admitting if something's not working. You shouldn't stick with things just because they were agreed. If it's not working, then change it, improve it, get rid of it if you need to, replace it. Um, but I think it's just become such a big beast now with so many things, so many different
yeah,
aspects and rules and regulations and guidelines and treaties and whatever. It's like a
yeah,
big ball of string. It's messy to unravel.
yeah. I also think that although the idea of the European Union was free trade, um, it's also become protectionist. There are so many rules and regulations to help protect, let's say the French farmers, for example,
Then we can't
and
keep
they,
picking on the French. Can't pick the Italian olive oil, the Spanish ham, the German
the
burst.
German car makers, yeah,
Yeah, car makers. Yeah,
yeah, but it has become protectionist, and protectionism is the opposite of free trade.
yeah.
So can you have both?
I don't know. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know.
Time will tell. I mean, I thought the nice thing was the final line of the obituary. And when it says his name, he says politician and public servant.
Yeah. Born on the 20th July 1925.
I know.
Died died 27th of December 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Had a
Politician
long,
and public
long
servant.
life. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he's certainly got his place in history because there are things that are in
Definitely.
place now that would not have been in place if he hadn't have been alive.
Yeah.
Um, hmm,
But I agree with you. That line, public servant, you know, politicians should dedicate their lives to serving the people who they supposedly represent.
yeah. But then,
Um,
as I said, there's no adjective there. Was he a good public servant? Was he a public servant who initially was good and then became a bad public servant? You know, because at the end, people didn't like him. They didn't want to get him, candidate for presidency. They, he wouldn't listen to people. From that's what I read in the obituary. So
yeah.
initially he was like innovative, had great ideas, wanted something new, bigger, better, stronger. But at the end, it sounded like people just wanted him to shut up and go away. That's what I'm reading, which is a shame,
Yeah.
which means good public servant to bad public servant. Or was he listening
I
to the
don't know.
public but not to his colleagues or his
I don't
counterparts?
know. I don't
Yeah.
know good. I don't know whether it goes from good to bad.
No.
But of his time. But the problem is you have to recognize when your time is over.
Yeah.
You know, for example, Margaret Thatcher. Of her time, Margaret Thatcher was considered to be, in my opinion, I think in your opinion as well, she did a lot of good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then her time was over.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was time for her to go.
Yeah.
And she went, you know, she left, she went. Whereas if you think about some politicians, let's say Donald Trump in America,
Yeah.
he was elected president, then he lost an election. His time was over, but he refuses to go away.
But then
Um,
you've got difference of opinion because the rest of the world thinks his time is up. And
yeah,
a lot of Americans still think it's his time.
okay, that's true. Let's think about Boris Johnson in the UK. He
Yeah.
had it. He had his time. His time is well and truly over, but he hasn't yet gone away. And I think politicians have got to learn. You have an opportunity. You have a moment. Then your moment's gone. You're not going to get another moment.
Nope. Nope. True with Tony Blair as well, wasn't it? And Bill Clinton.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Jacques Delores. Um, he had his moment. He had his time.
Do you think the power went to his head in the end?
Yeah, possibly.
You'd
Who
need to
knows?
read a biography, wouldn't you, to really get the true story?
Well, it depends on who actually writes the biography, doesn't it?
Exactly. There's always bias. There's always bias.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if he had written an autobiography, it's going to be more interesting to know what items he chose not to include. So even autobiographies can't be trusted because they always try to
Yeah.
present the view that the person wanted to be presented. It's never the truth. Was it the truth?
Of course.
The whole truth.
It's of course it's the truth. It's just your version of the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if you sat 1,000 people down in some sort of auditorium and got them to watch the same thing, and then you asked 1,000 people to describe what they've seen, you'll get 1,000
Mm-hmm.
different descriptions.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So basically, I presume then we need people to read the obituary,
Yeah.
maybe comment on their views of what they read. Maybe they read something different than what we do. Maybe they knew about Jacques Delors and they had already formed an opinion of him.
Yeah. And they can let us know what their opinions are.
Ah, very interesting. Okay. Well, I think that's a good start to 2024 for us.
Definitely.
Okay. And as always, I'll put a link to the article, which is freely accessible online. So you can all go and have a look and see exactly what we're talking about. And we'll choose something new next week.
Okay. See you next week.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you liked our podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe and stay connected with us. Until next time, goodbye.